in this video I will be discussing the Internet, digital media, and media convergence. When discussing the Internet, in order to know where we're going, it's really good to understand where we have come from. So the birth of the Internet actually started as something called ARPANET. It was created by the Department of Defense in the 1960s. This was creative with several different purposes in mind. Essentially, it was created by the DoD to enable researchers to share computer processing time, as well as to improve electronic mail communication. Each computer hub had a similar status and power, so therefore there was no master switch to shut it down. The original version of the Internet, ARPANET, was a distributed network system, and actually the Internet is still a distributed network system. So if you look at the image on this slide, you'll see there are three different types of systems that essentially we tend to think of when thinking of this types of communication networks. So the first one is a centralized network. If you have a centralized network, that means there's one central location where you could take down the entire network. So for example, if we were to think of internet connection at Salem State and just the Salem State network, so imagine we're out in the middle of nowhere and you don't have a smartphone or anything like that, and you're solely reliant on Salem State's network. If something were to happen to the central hubs across the university campus, you would be without internet connection. The other type is a decentralized network where you're setting up several different hubs, but again, essentially still having that similar problem. If you take out each of the individual hubs, you take down the entire network. However, with a distributed network system, that's not how it works at all. It's non-hierarchical and it's a decentralized system, meaning that each individual portal is its own thing. There's no, like I said, there's no master switch to shut it down. So if you take out a computer, if you take out a hub, if you take out a couple different servers, that's not going to take down the internet. So it's this very intricate, complicated web of interconnectivity between computers and people who are trying to communicate with one another. One of the issues with the internet that we haven't spent too much time during this course discussing is the challenge to keep personal information private. Some of you may have actually had firsthand experience with this. Others of you may be completely unaware of this, but whenever you use the internet, you're giving away your personal information. Obviously, right? So if you want to sign up for a quote-unquote free email account, free social media account, you have to give them your personal information. It kind of goes along those lines of nothing in this life is really free. It's going to have to cost you something, either your time or your effort, or in this case, your personal information. One of the major problems with that is who's controlling the security of this information? Who's ensuring that your personal information is secure? Who's ensuring that there aren't people out there who are stealing your personal information? And we hear instances of this all the time, right? So most recently it's with Target having their accounts hacked and people's credit card account information taken and things like that. After 9/11, one of the things that occurred was that government surveillance of online activity was permitted through the Patriot Act. So again, thinking of the mindset of the citizens after 9/11 was we were very concerned. We didn't know why the terrorists were attacking. We didn't even really know that it was a terrorist attack at first. We weren't really sure what was going on. And so in this fear, we reacted. Maybe not logically responded, but we reacted. And in one of those reactions came the Patriot Act. And again, in this act, we basically gave the government permission to conduct surveillance on all citizens because we didn't know who we could and could not trust. We didn't know which United States citizen was betraying their country and which was protecting our freedoms. So we allowed the government to do this. However, in the course of time since 9/11, we seem to have forgotten about that. And most recently with the NSA scandals, the National Security Administration was found to be wiretapping civilians' phone lines, as well as monitoring their online activities. As citizens in this country, we're a little perturbed by that in several different respects. So for one, we do want to feel secure and safe in our country. We want to know that our government will protect us and our military will protect us in a time of crisis or if we need them to. But at the same time, we don't want to feel like us as an individual person might be targeted as a potential terrorist or a potential threat to our country. So in this respect, as a society right now, we're kind of conflicted by this. Do we want our government spying on us, quote unquote spying, or do we not want them to know what we're doing? Most citizens would say, well, I have nothing to hide, but at the same time, I think most people would be uncomfortable with the fact that, everything that you do is being monitored. So the other side of that coin then is, well, if it's not the government, then it's the corporations, right? So Facebook is stalking you as you are going across the web, or through your cookies or your web browser caches. These little tidbits of information are being tracked about your behavior online. So whether you're shopping for something on Home Depot on one website and then seeing that advertisement play out on your Facebook page, you're seeing your online activity mirrored back to you and reflected to you. Another issue with online security is the threat of identity theft. It's fairly common in the United States right now. I, for one, have had my identity stolen at least 2 times, although one of those was overseas. Identity theft results in about $3.4 billion each year in the United States alone. So if we were to look at that at a global level, it's astronomical in comparison. One form of identity theft is phishing. So again, when you see sort of spammy type emails in your account, never respond to it by giving somebody your passwords or your social security number or something like that. Always question who's sending you something. You wouldn't just necessarily take somebody dressed up like a cop to be a cop unless they showed you some sort of form of identification. It should be that sort of rationale when we're online as well. That just because you receive an email saying that somebody needs your password or account information, that you would just give it to them without verifying that they are in fact who they say they are. Another important topic of interest when discussing the internet is that of content appropriateness. Who should control internet regulation was the argument that we need to protect the children. This is often used as a way to create legislative acts or regulations about the internet in general. One of which was the Children's Internet Protection Act of 2003. You guys are probably very familiar with this, especially if you were in high school, elementary school, middle school during this time frame, which required public schools and libraries to use filtering software. So when minors are using computers and going online, parents were very concerned about what they would find there. They kind of wanted to keep their children in a bubble and say, I don't want you accessing pornography, I don't want you accessing murder videos, I don't want you accessing too many of those adorable kitten videos, anything like that. And so what we saw instead was regulations come out that say, okay, we're going to restrict what you can and cannot access. Obviously, adorable kitten videos wouldn't fall under that, but things like pornography and violent content, foul language, lots and lots of what we as adults appreciate about our First Amendment rights necessarily weren't extended to minors. It limited minors' exposures to what parents thought and Congress thought would be inappropriate internet content, and it allowed the schools to have the power to say what minors could and could not access through their computers on their campuses. What I want you to think about as I discuss this, though, is how effective was that legislative act? Usually when I discuss this in face-to-face with my students, we come to the conclusion that it wasn't very effective, that there are lots of different ways around this. So then we have to come back as a society. So now that you guys are older and now that you are adults and you're allowed to go and view whatever you want on the internet, is it worth it to pass these types of legislative acts? Are they effective? Do they empower students and minors and children? Do they infringe on anyone's First Amendment right? Do our amendments apply to everybody in our society, or is it really only to those who are voting age and older? So when we think about content appropriateness, as media literate people, which you are becoming through this course, and hopefully I encourage you to take some other communication courses as well, is to really think about the power behind these legislative acts. Do we want to support things that are effective, or do we want to support things that might be stemming from fear or fear-mongering? Which brings me to my last slide, the internet and democracy. So, according to your book, and I have to agree, commercialism may be the biggest threat to the internet's democratic potential. The reason why this argument is so strong and the reason why media scholars and media activists are concerned is because of the impacts of commercial interests online. We're already seeing this, right? So, when the net neutrality ruling passed in February of 2014, it was passed in favor of big corporate interest. It wasn't in the people's interest, it wasn't in the consumer interest. Instead, Verizon was given much more power and authority over internet regulations and tiered access and information distribution and things like that. But what does that say for us as citizens? What is the internet's potential for creating a democratic sphere, for encouraging citizens to engage with democracy, to engage with each other, to engage in the democratic process? There are scholars out there who argue that technology alone doesn't make a communication revolution. However, as a tool, it can be incredibly useful for sparking one. So if you're familiar with world and global events in 2009 when the Iranian protests started, they largely used Twitter as a tool. Now, don't get me wrong, Twitter did not make the revolution. It was just a very effective tool for people to gather at that time, to communicate and things like that. So in this respect, technology will not spark the revolution, it will not win the revolution, but it can be a useful tool for communicating our thoughts, ideas, and plans for creating more civic engagement, more democratic potential. So as a citizen, I strongly encourage you to question all of the potentials of all of the communication media that we have discussed this semester. What can you do with radio? What can you do with television? What can you do with the internet? How can you become more civically engaged? How can you become more engaged in a media literate process so that advertisements aren't fooling you or duping you into buying things that you don't necessarily need, or to make you believe that you're not good enough, that you need a product to make yourself feel better, or anything like that. So when we become media literate consumers, that we really are questioning the media we're consuming, that we're questioning the larger corporate interests behind the media that are being created for our consumption.